sunshine I gotta love, and I know that it's all mine.
Hi there, my name is Hillary, and this is the third video in a series of Revit tutorials that I'm creating. So we've already covered interface basics and beginner troubleshooting and how to model a very basic building from start to finish. And now we're going to cover how to start a design project. So just before we start, a disclaimer: it might not be appropriate to use these methods if you're working on a tech project or a project for work. These are going to be ways that you can model quickly and efficiently, but not necessarily to Revit's full capabilities. So today we're going to cover the beginnings of how to create topography, a few different methods of how to create context to start your model, and how to create massing to begin your parti model. So as always, we're going to start by clicking New, Architectural Template, OK. So now I'm going to show you how to start your topography. So one method is to download a DWG from the internet that has topo contours. So from the Carleton website, just something that I've had access to during my school, we have this website and we have this website. And both of these allow you to download a DWG file. For right now, I'm just going to use this website. I'll show you how to download one of these squares. So I'm going to pretend that our site is this square right here, and I'm going to click Direct Download. If you're working from another city and you have resources like this where you can download topography, even just the contours, because that's all we're going to be using, this will be helpful for you, hopefully. So once I've downloaded this, I can open it in CAD. And as you can see, it's given me this complicated giant file. So in my Revit file, I'm going to click Insert, Import CAD, and I'm going to click this file. Now, this will probably be checked. I just always uncheck that because we don't want Revit to change any of our lines. And then you have some drop-down options here, and which level you want to place it at doesn't really matter because our project isn't geolocated and we can always move it afterwards. I'm going to click Open. This might take a while because these files are giant. Now the nice thing is Revit can handle really big files that might be really overwhelming for your computer. For example, my computer could hardly handle this in CAD, but it's working just fine in Revit. This file is three-dimensional, so if I make a 3D view or I go to my 3D view, I can see what we're working with. And I can orbit again by clicking Shift and the scroll wheel on my mouse. So there's a lot of extra data in here that we don't need. It looks like the pink is probably the tops of buildings. So it looks like the blue and maybe pink might be our topography lines. That would make sense because there's a big dip right there. So I'm just going to double check in the CAD file to see if that makes sense. If I click on the blue line, yeah, so it tells me that it is contours minor. So sure, I'm going to use that. And this pink is contours major. Just for now, I'm just going to show you how to make it with just the blue lines, but you can add more lines if you want, depending on your level of accuracy. So I'm going to go back to a plan, and I'm going to say massing in site and topo surface. So this time I'm going to say create from import, select import instance, and I'm going to click this. Now I have all of my layers, which there's so many. So I'm just going to scroll, hold Shift, click everything, and unclick those check marks, and I'm going to find just the contours minor. So it looks like it's this. And I'm going to click OK. And pray that it works. So my computer is done loading, so it must have created something. I'm going to click the green check mark. And I got an error earlier saying that I couldn't see the topography in this view. So maybe that makes sense. I'm going to click the green check mark. And then I'm going to open my 3D view to see if it is there. So it looks like it is there. If I type in VV, Visibility Graphics, and I can turn off an imported category, I can turn off my CAD drawing. I'm going to click OK. And now I can see the topo surfaces there. And I can type in SD for shaded view, or I can change the view right here, and it's looking pretty good. So one thing that you'll notice about topography in Revit, it's a little odd, but in 3D, it looks paper thin. But then if I create a section box through it, or if I create any sort of section views, if you watch, when it's being cut, it goes on forever. It doesn't matter how big my section box is. So it's kind of weird in that way. I can split the surface if I want to trim it. I can make a building pad. All of that is useful when I'm getting into actually modeling my building. But if you just want the topography to start off, this is good enough. And your CAD drawing, you can easily just keep it turned on only in a plan if you want to see all of these existing building footprints and where all the trees are. Now I'm going to show you another method that is sort of unconventional and not really that perfect, but if you don't have access to any sort of CAD files, for example, if you're working in another city where you don't have this lovely resource of Ottawa downloads, maybe you're working in a rural area, I'm going to show you a way that you can kind of work around that. So if we go to Google Earth, we can take a screenshot and we can use this later on. I'm going to save this as a JPEG. So you're going to have to scale whatever image you put in Revit. And the scaling is really great in Revit, but you need to know at least one dimension. And when you're going to dimension something in order to scale it, it's best to have a bigger dimension. So measuring, for example, one of these parking lots, or if you know the size of a car or a parking spot, that might not be that helpful because it could get pretty off when scaling it. So if you know any dimension that's any bigger, for example, the size of one of these buildings or the whole lot or anything like that, that's going to be a lot more helpful. So we have GeoOttawa, which is really helpful. It's sort of like Google Earth, where I can have the colors showing or the grayscale or the current image, which honestly, the satellite views are more accurate than these maps often. So if I zoom in, it's a very clear image, and I'm just going to measure from one spot all the way to the other edge of this site, just to make sure that it's accurate. And now I'm going to take a screenshot, save that. Now I'm going to open Revit. I'm going to delete this for now. I'm going to click Insert, Import an Image, and I'm going to click View to open. Now I can drop this right here, and I'm going to just change my units by typing UN. I'm just going to change it to meters. And now I'm going to scale this image. So this is the little scale icon. And I'm just going to try and click as close to that blue line that I drew as possible. So I'm going to click once for the start point, once for the end point. So now the bold blue text is what I can type. So I'm going to type in 270.4 and then click enter. And now my image should be scaled, so I can test to see if that is the right dimension by typing DL, which is detail lines, which are two-dimensional lines, and I can click once, and now I can see the length. Okay, yeah, it's right. I'm just going to click escape and then escape again. So now we have our context, a base map, and we can use this now to extrude surfaces and create some context. So let's say our site is flat, like most sites, and we don't want to use, or we don't have the option to use topography from a downloaded DWG. I'm going to go to architecture and I'm going to model in place some extrusions and shapes to create some topography. So just to give you an overview on this component tool. So all of these tools are what we would usually use to model building elements. Now, there's sort of a way to cheat this, and that's with components. So if I go to the drop down, place a component is where I can place a family. So for example, furniture or plumbing fixtures that we saw in the last video. Or we can model in place, which if you're doing a proper BIM, you want to avoid this because it makes your model heavy and things won't schedule properly. It's sort of like you're using Revit as if it's Rhino or Google SketchUp, where you're just making shapes. So I'm going to click model in place. And whatever, I'm just gonna say it's a generic model. Okay. And now I can name this whatever, let's call it context. Okay. So these are my tools that I can use. So the primary one I'm going to use is the extrusion. But if you want to, for example, create like a riverbed, you could create a sweep that then just sweeps along a curve, the edge of the river. You could use the blend tool if you want some more organic shape of your topography. But if your site's mostly flat, and if the context is mostly flat, we can create an extrusion. And now these are our tools. So we are, our work plane, which is where we are going to start our extrusion, is level 1, which is fine. And then we can use these tools to draw our shape. I'm just gonna make a nice big rectangle. Check mark. And now if I go to the 3D view, so I can just pull it way down, and that's what we're gonna start to work with. Now I can edit in place, which will allow me to edit this component. So I can go back to level 1 and I can make it wireframe so that it's see-through. And I can say create another extrusion, and maybe this time I'm going to draw the shape of the road. I'm just rushing this to show you, to give you an idea. We can draw the shape of the road. So now I'm just going to click escape to stop drawing, escape again. I'm going to click tab to make sure it's a closed shape. Perfect, it is. And I'm going to click the green check mark again. And as always, I'm going to go back to my 3D view. So now I can see this. And now I can raise it a little bit. Let's see. I can raise it a little bit, or I can turn it into a void. So I'm going to change that to be a void because I want my road to be a little bit lower than my earth or my sidewalks. And now I can orbit some more. It's going to be orange because it's a void that's not cutting anything. And then I'm going to use this little cut tool, and I'm going to click on the extrusion and the road. There we go. Now we have a little road. Sorry about how basic this is. Oh, and if I want to change this extrusion, I can click on it and say edit extrusion, and let's say I want to make it more of this shape. So now I can click finish model, and now this is my base. Now I can either keep editing this and add all my little extrusions for my buildings in here in this generic model, or I can add another generic model and add the extrusions for the buildings in there. So let's do that. So I'm going to say architecture, model in place, and this time I'm going to say buildings. Okay, and now I'm going to create a bunch of extrusions. So if I know, let's say that all of these buildings, these houses nearby, they're all low rise, and let's say they're all 1 story. I can make those all in one extrusion. So I can just go like this, trace them all. So I can trace them all and make one extrusion. And as you can see, I have my work plane is level 1, which is what I want. And then I have my extrusion start and end. So I want this to be, let's say, 3 meters high. We are in meters, yes. So now if I go to the 3D view, I can see that they are 3 meters high. And if I want to make them double story, I can make them 6 meters high. And now let's say I want some taller buildings. I can create some more extrusions. And let's say I want this, I want this. I want those to be 1-story buildings. This is another 1-story building. I'll throw that in this same extrusion. Okay, check mark. And now I go to 3D view, and let's make all of these 3 meters high. And now we have to figure out how tall all of our buildings are. So again, if you have a CAD that's 3D and you have all of the building heights, that's really helpful. You can just measure those. But if you don't, you can go to Google Maps. I'm sure profs are, or employers are cringing at this, but you can orbit by clicking Shift and moving your mouse. And then I can see how many stories they are. So just an easy rule of thumb is if it's 1 story and it's residential, and other than that, every story, make it 3.5 meters just to be safe. And so I can look at this building, I can say, let's make that 1/2 story plus another 3.5 meters plus another 3.5 meters. And I will go back to my model, create another extrusion, trace this building, click check mark. So now from our investigation into Google Maps, we can say that it's around 8.5 meters. And nothing has to be perfect because no one's ever gonna open this BIM. But it looks pretty, right? So you just keep doing that. And if you're going to be modeling a lot of context for things that are far away, you could just do building footprints and extrude them all at the same height of maybe 1 meter. Or you can, we had a project in Tokyo where it had to look really dense, but we weren't gonna model all of the buildings to different heights. So we just made a whole bunch of the same extrusions pretty much of the same height. And if some were noticeably taller, then we made those ones taller. Just to give the idea of how dense a city is or how dense the context is usually the most important thing. And if there's some sort of noticeable geometry, let's say there's a church nearby, or you want to capture that all of these residential houses have the same roof line, we can just add another extrusion that is the roof line. So I'm going to say create extrusion. So this is new territory. So we were just making extrusions extruded vertically off of the work plane was level 1. So that made sense. So now the awesome thing about Revit is you can always change that work plane really easily. So I'm going to use this work plane tab right here. I'm going to say set. And now I have my levels here, or I can use this pick plane. I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to click on this face. And now I'm going to just select this And maybe this side, I'm gonna trim right here or use TR to cut that line to the right size. Click escape, click this, delete that. And now I could be looking from the side, but I like to look in 3D. This is our midpoint, so it snaps really nicely. And I'm just going to draw like this and connect it to the corner, click escape, click here, and click that endpoint. And then escape once, escape twice, and then delete that line. So now I have a closed shape that I can extrude. I'm gonna click the green check mark, and now I'm just going to drag this, and it should snap to that end. Now I can keep it like this, or I can actually join this extrusion to this extrusion, and that seam disappears. So you just keep repeating this process over and over again, and that's how you create context. I'm gonna click Finish Model. So the process for creating massing for when you're, let's say, beginning a parti is basically the same. So we're gonna use the same extrusion tool, the same architecture model in place component, and we're just gonna start creating extrusions. So if I'm going to make, let's say, a tower, I'm going to say model in place, go model in place, and again, I always just do it a generic model because again, no one's gonna open this BIM and see the categories. I'm gonna click OK. Now I'm going to, let's say, create an extrusion. I'm going to put a tower right here. Okay, I'm gonna make it 30 meters tall, click OK. Nah, I want it taller than that. Beautiful. And I want, let's say, the first 2 floors to be commercial. Let's make a little podium. This is a giant. I'm gonna make that 6 meters. Beautiful, giant. I'm gonna click join. Amazing. Now let's say I want a giant cantilever. Let's create another extrusion. This time I'm gonna say set, pick a plane. I'm gonna make it this plane. And now I'm going to draw a giant roof overhang. Tab to make sure it's a closed shape. It is. I'm gonna click the green check mark and I'm gonna make it 1 meter thick. Beautiful, stunning, amazing. And now let's say I want to make this taller. It still knows that this cantilever is going to stay attached to that face, so I can move this up here and that still stays. Now the other thing is if I want to make things different colors, let's say for a presentation, I can click on this, right click, override graphics and view by element. And I'm gonna say that the surface pattern of this is going to be yellow. And I'm gonna make it solid fill. Okay, beautiful. So now if you want to, let's say, make a couple more of these boxes, change their colors, and then if you can take a screenshot, make a little label that shows what each color means. That's pretty much how I would start a massing model. So the other little side note to this is that I'm calling this massing, but we're not actually using the massing tool. So this is, the massing tool is here, and that is a whole other set of tools, and it's not as easy as just making extrusions. So I'll go over the mass tool in another video probably, but when I'm saying massing right now, I'm just meaning massing in terms of how your site is organized, not actually the tool mass in Revit. A little confusing. So now as kind of a last note, if you've already done your massing phase in, let's say something like Rhino, because you might not be confident in Revit yet, you can always export a mass in Rhino as a DWG, Sometimes the 2018 version doesn't work, so save it as a 2013 DWG just in case if it doesn't work. And then you can say insert, import CAD, and you can bring in that solid mass that you already have made from Rhino into your Revit model. And Revit can handle it. It doesn't matter that it's big and complicated. And then you can use that mass that you already have, if you want, and start modeling your buildings properly using the actual walls and floors and everything. Basically just use that form that you made as a reference. If you ever want to turn off that CAD file, you can just type VV and again, go to import categories and turn on or off a CAD file. So I think that's all I'm going to cover today. This is just the beginnings of how to start a design project. But just to give you an idea that you're not necessarily starting with a blank canvas, it's really easy to move into Revit right away. And of course, when you're designing, you don't want to move right into modeling everything properly. When you're trying to figure out a site strategy, you don't want to be throwing in real walls. So this is just a way to start your design project without going straight into those complicated and limiting tools that Revit offers. I hope this helps. Let me know what else you want me to cover in later videos. And thank you so much for listening.
For the sunshine, I gotta love, and I know that it's all mine. Oh.